While I was doing some research about mistakes that changed the world, I thought that, yes, I could talk about penicillin, I could talk about artificial sugar, or about toasters, or about the Titanic sinking because of a small key that went missing. But I thought there must have been a mistake that changed the entire course of humanity, even if some might argue that toasted bread was already quite something. But that is when I realized that I knew exactly what was humanity's greatest mistake. To give you a little hint, this mistake happened somewhere 12,000 years ago in Southwest Asia, during which our dear Homo sapiens ancestors gave birth to the concept of farming. This is commonly called the agricultural revolution. On the eve of this particular event, these sapiens were between 5 and 8 million, and they were real nomads, meaning they never set camp, and they traveled the whole wide world. They worked 35 to 45 hours a week. Their food was diverse, and nomadic life reduced their exposure to natural disasters. The absence of cattle saved them from infectious diseases, and after the first often critical years, they lived up to 60 or sometimes even 80 years old. But then the agricultural revolution happened, which many would call a real miracle, and yet the improvement of living conditions through agriculture was a mirage. The increase in the production of food created an increase in the population, which absorbed the surplus of production. Infectious diseases wreaked havoc. The average farmer lived a harder life than the average hunter-gatherer and got a much worse diet in return. But it was already too late. The population was simply too large to return to the life of foragers, which could not anymore supply enough food for the tens of children each family was having. There were also no memories of such a life. But the populations kept the mad hope of increasing their earnings through more work, which we can call the luxury trap. This luxury trap can be described using a very simple expression. Men worked harder and harder in hopes of gaining more food, not realizing that their efforts were completely undercut by the growing population they sustained. In times before this, when men were still hunter-gatherers, parents had more children in times of plenty and less in times of need. Like all other mammals, humans have hormonal mechanisms that help control procreation. In good times, female puberty is reached earlier, and chances of getting pregnant are higher. In bad times, puberty is late, and fertility decreases. But after agriculture became the new fashion, women had more time to have babies, maybe even one a year. Because tribes had more mouths to feed, they planted more wheat and created more fields. Babies were needed as extra hands on these fields, which encouraged even more to have babies. But children became weaned at very early ages and fed on porridge rather than maternal milk. This weakened their constitutions and made infant mortality soar. Children died in droves, and adults ate bread by the sweat of their brows. The average person in Jericho of 8,500 BC lived a harder life than the average person of 9,500 BC. But nobody realized what was happening. Hence, the agricultural revolution narrowed the horizon of man to his land and his house, which he had to work and defend against enemies. He had to plan for the future, limit his consumption until the next harvest, or in anticipation of bad weather or war. In short, the agricultural revolution was history's biggest fraud. Of course, transition from nomadic to agricultural life took place gradually. A common plant, that was wheat, developed on land burnt by Homo sapiens. Men realized its domesticable character and undertook to cultivate it. at the cost of immense efforts. The life of each individual deteriorated. Humans were now exhausting their bodies for very hard labor, and were at the mercy of a poor harvest or the raid of an enemy tribe. With this perspective in mind, the agricultural revolution was a huge mistake, and it left humanity and the complex societies that emerged from it, from a better term, to be a hot mess. And to conclude with a simple fact and a funny yet absolutely terrifying question, wheat today occupies 10 times the size of Britain. So actually, who domesticated the other? Is it men or is it wheat?